It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much to everybody for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your workday. Big shout out as well to everybody listening on the RealAg Radio podcast. No matter where you're farming, Canada, the U.S., or beyond, it is great to have you here. Okay, Friday, which means we got some regular routine here on Friday. So we got a RealAg Issues Panel. Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, both of RealAgriculture. They will be here to really kind of break down the big news and issues of the week, and there's a lot of them. We're trying to get through as much as we possibly can. We've also got Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, here today to break down what's going on in these cattle markets. Love talking to Anne every 2 weeks here on the show. If you have any feedback on today's program, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email. shaney@realagriculture.com is my email. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as TikTok. Now, YouTube in particular, go to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe. We have, it's a library. It is a just amazing amount of video content that is on our YouTube channel. I would put our volume of agronomic videos in particular, I think we got the most in North America when you look at all the different agricultural media companies. So check it out. It's on our YouTube channel. We've also got a lot of stuff there when it comes to the markets, machinery, news interviews, different stuff like that. So check it out. That is the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. Or another way to give feedback is to call the RealAg feedback line. That is 855-776-6147. I'm ready. I'm pumped for today. I love Fridays because we get a chance to get through a lot of different topics and provide perspective. And also, I think it really triggers you to send your feedback. So please encourage you to do that. This is not just a one-way conversation where we tell you how you should think. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what your thoughts are because those perspectives are very, very important. So please participate. If you do have a thought, if you do have a comment, you do have a bit of a burr under your saddle, make sure you get your feedback to us. We want to hear from you. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear from Anne Wasko. We're talking cattle markets right after this.
ABJ Agri-Products is North America's exclusive distributor for air bubble jets and easy jets. These sprayer nozzles reduce the number of driftable droplets and at the same time maintain a uniform droplet size, primarily between 300 and 400 micron, ensuring more even dispersion of your chemical products, providing reduced drift and increased plant coverage. Let us help improve your spraying operation by visiting abjagra.com. That's abjagri.com.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Friday. Let's talk cattle markets now. We're joined, as always, by Anne Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Shaun. Good to be here.
Always love me some beef market update. Okay, let's get an update on what's happening in the cash cattle trade.
Okay, well, here, of course, we've come into May, so you expect that our spring highs for the U.S. are likely behind us by the looks of things. In the south, pretty quiet test down in the south, Texas, Kansas, 170. That would be a couple bucks lower if that's how we finish up. In the north, looking pretty steady, 172 to 178, kind of expect an average around 176. So no big surprises, kind of a quiet week, to be honest with you. The choice cutout, it also looks like it's likely topped. You hate to call these things too soon, but it was $4 lower this week, just under 306. That's still a great price, especially if you go back to pre-COVID levels, but certainly off from what it was a week ago. And so kind of thinking that as we start to see the U.S. supplies pick up seasonally, as they do into late spring and summer, that cutout price typically comes off with that. So that's kind of, it's kind of pretty normal what we're seeing going on in terms of timing, in terms of seasonality. Now, locally, the Alberta fed cattle market, very solid again, fully steady, 385 to 390 delivered dressed. That's going to keep our weekly average price up near that 272, again, all-time record highs as we've been in for some time. So great news. Again, carcass weights in Canada. Last week's average was 900 pounds on a steer. That's 37 pounds below last year, and we're 9 pounds under the 5-year average. So it's been a long time since we've been able to talk about carcass weights below a year ago, let alone below the 5-year average. So same thing, carcass weights still have some downside. Seasonally, they make their low kind of around the end of June. So expect that weight to still come down some more.
So if you look at that cutout price and you look at the carcass weights, how does those two things, and plus maybe some other variables, how does that impact what we're seeing in terms of the slaughter rates out there?
Well, things are certainly slowing down, especially here in Canada. We had a really good slaughter pace through the first quarter, but kind of in April and May, we've seen those levels lighten up as, certainly the supplies out there are smaller. Our on-feed numbers are smaller, as we've talked about, and we've got another report coming out from Canfax later today that I think will say the same thing for our May 1 numbers. So packers are backing their kills off. Last week's kill, just to kind of give you a comparison compared to the same week last year, was 10% smaller. Now, just breaking down fed cattle versus a cow kill, for example, though, year to date, our fed cattle kills down 5%. Our cows are still up 7%.
Whoa!
Now, most of that was in the first quarter, though, Shaun. Even the cow kill is slowing up here in the last few weeks. But talk about cow price. Even with that cow kill up 7%, which usually you got more supply, you're going to have a lower price. Not the case with cows. Our slaughter cow price average, according to Canfax last week, was $150. So that's an average. So you got cows on either side of that. That's matching the all-time high of 2015. So a super, super cow market in terms of these cow prices.
What's leading to that? Like, what's pushing that to happen?
Well, North America-wise, we've still got strong demand for, our lean beef, what makes up our hamburger supply, if you will. So prices around, North America are still very strong in terms of what's required. And even though our cow kill is up here, it's still not a big number from a North American perspective. So I think that's the balance. And cow beef is kind of a global protein, right? So in terms of North America prices versus, say, Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay, all those kind of comparative prices.
Any update from an export perspective that we can chat about?
Yeah, we're getting dribbles of data in. I know that federal strike kind of slowed things up a little bit, but we did just get March live cattle exports in. So I thought the biggest one that jumped out at me was fed cattle exports from Canada to the U.S. in the month of March. We're up 49%. So we saw 40,000 head of fed cattle go south in the month of March alone. Year to date, just to kind of put it in perspective for first quarter, fed cattle exports up 14%. So that was another reason, I think, Shaun, that we got cleaned up so quickly, and we were able to get current much more quicker than we really struggled with last year. On the flip side, feeder cattle exports in March were half of last year's pace. There was only 10,000 head of feeders head south, and our first quarter total tally is about 23,000. That's down 68%. And just to finish up on the live cattle, for Q1 slaughter cow exports were down 24% at about 42,000 head all year. That's about 14,000 head of cows going south per month. So the big news in my mind was that fed cattle exports.
Okay, so the feeder cattle exports being lower than a year ago, what market dynamic has flipped that? What's happened?
That dynamic, I think, Shaun, is cattle feeders in Canada have to keep the cattle in Canada. We know these supplies are tightening. Pen space continues to grow, especially in southern Alberta, if you've been looking around lately, in terms of expansion. And as our cattle supplies tighten, based on the cattle herd and our beef cow numbers, there's going to be tight competition for feeder cattle. And I think that's the storyline for the rest of this year. So they're going to do all they can, I expect, to keep what supplies they can here in Canada.
If we could expand our cow herd and retain heifers like we are good at building more pen space, that would be real. If you could find the big solution there, that would be great.
Well, and that's a good point, Shaun. That'll be something that we watch, even with today's on-feed report for Western Canada, that heifer placement piece. So we've talked about that over the last 2 years. We've placed all the heifers on feed and fed them or exported them. That's going to change. And so that'll be the key piece that we watch in this data going forward. When do we start to see those heifer placements slow up? And once they slow up, that's an indication, hey, they're staying back on the ranch and something might be changing. So there's some things we can watch.
Speaking of the ranch, what's the grass condition out there like in Western Canada? What have you been seeing and hearing from some of your peers?
Well, again, variation's the key word. I can speak quite positively about what's going on here in Southwest Saskatchewan for a change. We've had some great moisture here, especially in the last week, and so things are popping. But I certainly know that there's areas that you get into central and northern Alberta that are not in the same boat. So again, that variation, but kind of selfishly, I'm talking from a pretty good place here in Southwest Saskatchewan.
Well, that's good because southwestern Saskatchewan has been one of the spots where we've been talking about how it's in such bad condition. So that's a real positive.
This is well, looking out the window today, it's looking quite green and Irishly.
Really?
Okay. My new word.
I'll roll with it. I'm not going to wordsmith you at all. And you mentioned Northern Alberta, the fires. We had Brad DeBow, the general manager with the Alberta Beef Producers, on RealAg Radio earlier this week. The displacement of livestock and trying to manage that and keep people safe and animals out of harm's way. Some people, in the middle of calving. It's just your heart goes out to all those people.
Absolutely. And of course, just a reminder from a stats perspective, Alberta's our biggest province in the country in terms of where the cow herd and our herd resides. So a lot of those are, certainly in central and northern Alberta. So it's a big area in terms of the impact of numbers as well.
Yeah. And thanks so much for joining us here this week. Really appreciate it. All the best to you and have a great weekend.
Okay. Thanks. You too, Shaun.
When we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to get into the RealAg Issues Panel. Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner standing by. You're listening to RealAg Radio.
Join us for the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, August 15th to 17th at Calgary, Alberta. Spend time networking on the trade show floor, hear from keynote speakers, take in breakout sessions designed to increase profit, manage your rangeland, and navigate trends. Get up close to advanced techniques and hands-on demos and experience bullfighting at the closing party. Proud, innovative, and loyal, we are beef. Registration is now open. Visit CanadianBeefIndustryConference.com for full details and to register.
As you head out into the field this season, The Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Now time for the RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, your host, and joined by our two panelists, Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith, both of RealAgriculture. We'll bring them in a second. But first, I want to tell you about Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. That is US Borax. And you can find it, you can find more information, I should say, by going to borax.com. Okay, let's bring in our panelists. Up first, it is Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, how are you doing, and how's that weather there?
The weather has been beautiful this week, and we've got a lot done. We started planting day 2 of the planter rolling on our farm, and had some field work done earlier in the week. So it's definitely spring, and temperatures in the high 20s Celsius a couple times this week. So
Nice.
it's been nice.
I saw some really crazy storms in parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba too.
We've dodged some of those, but there's been some hail, some heavy rain amounts that has certainly set things back. But we've been lucky right where we are, at least this time around. And it feels like spring or even early summer in this part of the world right now.
Nice, like it. Also joining us is Lyndsey Smith out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, great to chat with you.
Yeah, hi everybody.
How's your week been?
Oh my gosh. It's been wild. So we are in the midst of lambing our woolly pigs, if you will, and so that has kept us busy. There's plenty of crop going in the ground though as well. I wanted to say, to the point of what's going on in the West, but also here, but I'm always so amazed by how much ground can get seeded or planted when everybody's rolling. So I'm excited to see, we are starting to see the beginning of the crop reports come out for all the provinces. And so I'm excited to see how we progress here, because certainly for some of the areas anyway here in Eastern Ontario, even with all that crazy rain we had, we are rolling and things are going well and the sun is shining and it's beautiful. So we'll see how quickly we can sort of make up some time.
Yeah, and with all the combine capacity that's out there, like obviously we can harvest a crop now faster, but I haven't really put the numbers to this, but if you probably compare to say 30 years ago, our rate of increase of time is much higher when it comes to planting and seeding, I think, than if you compared it to harvest. Would you agree with that, Kelvin?
I think that I was just thinking along those lines as well. Yeah, I think our ability to get the crop in the ground is, you can definitely, if we had perfect weather and ideal conditions and didn't have to sleep, it could be done quite quickly and harvest. I think would still take much longer time than that, probably twice as long at least.
Sleep is for the weak. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding, everybody. Yeah, go ahead, Lyndsey.
If I sound tired on the show today, that might maybe it might be catching up here already on date.
One of the things this week that it goes without saying, these Alberta wildfires. We had Brad DeBow, general manager with Alberta beef producers, on the show earlier this week, and he didn't give any numbers in terms of number of cattle displaced or things like that, but I was texting last night with the comms person at Alberta beef producers, Deb Murphy, who used to be here at RealAgriculture, and there's more to come here. Like we need some rain in those parts to shut those fires down. It is just staggering to watch the news at night and see some of that footage, Lyndsey.
Yeah, well, and also, following on social media, of course, whether it's Instagram or Facebook, I've certainly made the effort, of course, to try and meet as many Western Canadian farmers as possible over my time in media. And so I have, wonderful people all over the prairies, and seeing what some of the producers in Alberta are going through, it's absolutely terrifying. Like, these fires are moving so quickly. They're not slowing down, and just the stress of trying to get, the humans out of harm's way, but the livestock, the cattle, trying to get them moved to safety, trying what you can, whether it's, cultivating in line breaks or these sorts of things, but it's just so widespread and there's just so many people impacted. So, to that end, whether with Deb or with Alberta Beef, it is going to be some time, I think, before we understand the full impact of this as far as, losses and those sorts of things, because it's just such a huge area that's impacted. So we'll have to just keep waiting and absolutely, this is calving season for so many. That's the other part. Like, moving animals is one thing, but moving animals that are potentially also calving, the stress just stresses me out from afar. So I can only imagine how our producers are faring there in Alberta.
Yeah, very, very true. Kelvin, was there any economic news this week that we should make note of here on the Issues Panel?
That's a pretty broad question. I guess we had, U.S. CPI came out, rose 4.9% on an annual basis in April, according to the latest data from the U.S. Labor Department. That's the smallest year-over-year increase since May of 2021, over 2 years ago, or 2 years ago this month. So, and coming in slightly lower than what economists were expecting. The expectation was 5%. So here CPI came in at 4.9%. So, sign that inflation is easing in the U.S., but we'll see. I do want to also echo Lyndsey's thoughts. Our thoughts are with all the producers impacted in Alberta, and one of the things about situations like this, it's always amazing to see how neighbors help each other and how awful situations like this bring out the best in people. And just wanted to say, the clips and photos on social media that I've seen of people helping each other and working together and getting creative and using farm equipment to help combat these fires. It's great to see that.
I said it earlier this week. One of the farmers we were trying to get on the Farmer Rapid Fire, he's a helicopter pilot, and he's like, nope, I'll be gone, shutting the cedar down and going to help. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you mentioned that in the U.S. on the economic stuff, grocery prices edged down 0.2%. That's the second straight monthly drop in the U.S. That's when it comes to food costs, that's encouraging.
It's encouraging food costs, but it also means that our commodity prices that's reflective also of what farm gate prices are in terms of farmers' cash income as well. So that's where we're seeing the squeeze potentially in some areas with input costs not coming down at the same rate.
And Lyndsey, speaking of food, what happened this week in the Senate when it comes to food and I guess a friend of the industry that a lot of people remember very fondly?
So this is actually, it's great news in that, so if anyone has ever celebrated Food Day Canada, it's usually in conjunction with the August long weekend. It has been going on for 20 years, but we now have enshrined Food Day Canada into law. So it officially becomes Food Day Canada. This year will be celebrated on August 5th, but we now have legislation that essentially sets out the day, and that was passed this week. It passed third reading, and Senator Rob Black, of course, has been a champion of this to have this happen. Now this, if anyone remembers, and I guess we do have to talk about this because we are rapidly approaching the 20-year anniversary of BSE being found in a Canadian cow. That'll be happening May 20th. That'll be 20 years. And so it was Anita Stewart way back 20 years ago who championed Food Day Canada sort of in sort of response to the crisis that was BSE. And she, of course, passed away a few years ago. So this is, for all who knew her and loved her, this would make her, I'm sure, super proud and very happy. So this is a good news story for agriculture in Canada, and we will have a official Food Day in Canada August 5th this year.
Yeah. 20 years since BSE.
I know. Time flies, but also doesn't.
We're still killing cows like crazy. We just had the beef market update earlier here on the show. Those numbers up again. So yeah. Now rain will help. Right? Yes. If we get some rain, and we have had it in dry parts like southwestern Saskatchewan, that's going to help. You got some grass out there. There's some. At least you have the potential to consider retaining more of those heifers. Kelvin, it seems no matter how or where people fit in the industry, a lot of people really taking some celebration in the fact that this is now law.
Food Day Canada, yes, it's and it is a celebration of food and ultimately agriculture in Canada, and to have it pass through the Senate and the House of Commons and be this positive story and have people reflect positively on the role of food and the food industry and agriculture as a whole. I think that's it's a great initiative.
We got some other things that happened in the Senate this week, and we'll get to that when we come back. You're listening to RealAg Radio here on this Friday.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trait options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
It is time for today's product spotlight. Joining me on the line is Roger Gunning with US Borax. So what's something that growers in North America don't necessarily think about when it comes to their fertilizer?
There could be heavy metals like arsenic and fertilizers that have not gone through the stringent refining process. It is well known that arsenic can be toxic to plants as well as animals. If you have a high level of arsenic in your fertilizer and you don't know it, it will accumulate in the soil, and then it'll be taken up in your crops. Refined borates, like those we sell here at US Borax, go through a 7-step process to help ensure at the end our product is pure.
How then can growers get more information if they want to know more about US Borax?
Definitely take a look at our website, agriculture.borax.com, or give me a phone call, 773-923-7420.
All right, Roger, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel. Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and also Alpine Premium Liquid Fertilizers for Canadian farmers. Hey, over the last 50 years, Alpine has developed broad Canadian roots. We strive to maximize fertilizer efficiency to support our farmers and their communities with high-quality liquid fertilizers from start to finish. To learn more, contact Alpine by going to alpinepfl.com today. You like that, eh, Lyndsey? They developed broad Canadian roots. I see the play that happened there. I like that.
Mm-hmm. I some of these reads are just lovely. We have fun with them.
And fun. I was just going to say, and fun.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I
like it a
we
lot.
very much appreciate the support the companies like Alpine provide to RealAg Radio here as we broadcast to Canada and the U.S. Of course, Alpine, if you're in the U.S., it's nature's. So I'll give you that tip there. Some cross-promotion as well. Now, we were talking about the Senate earlier, and, the Senate is not usually this bustle of activity, but this week was a little bit different. Now, we talked about Senator Black earlier. He also was attempting to take the current Liberal-affiliated senators to task. I know everyone's supposed to be independent, but okay, come on, who are we kidding? He took somebody to task when it came to what the government's decision was in terms of this Volkswagen plant. I believe it was like 1,500 acres of farmland that is now where this plant is going to reside. I have an audio of Senator Black in the Senate. Here's what he had to say.
Senator Gold, Canada's farmland remains a finite and valuable resource for Canadians and the world. Despite your government's repeatedly stating that the importance and prioritization of agriculture and food security, I remain perplexed by the agreements and policies we continue to see that undermine the capabilities and capacities of our processors and producers. In a recent deal, a foreign company was given the green light for the procurement of 1,500 acres, the equivalent of 1,134 football fields of prime agricultural land in southern Ontario. Around this deal, $700 million from Ottawa to build the plant, along with $500 million from the Ontario government, plus $13 billion. $13 billion in federal subsidies for this gigafactory. Let's not forget, colleague, as well, the $34 million in tariffs taken from farmers' fertilizer purchases earlier this year, an essential product needed to feed the country and the world, which was not returned to our farmers. While the province retains jurisdiction of land use planning, governments at all levels have permitted the land that grows our food to be swallowed up by urban sprawl, damaging valuable soils, reducing our food production capacities, all while subsidizing this destruction and financially limiting those who put food on our tables. So my question is, Senator Gold, When will this government actually prioritize Canadian agriculture and food, stop financially depriving our farmers, and stop giving money to companies that will actively undermine and take away our crucial farmlands?
That is Senator Black in the Senate this week. So, Lyndsey, a lot of the attention has been to the amount of money that is going to be given to Volkswagen, but Senator Black brings up another issue tied to this is the farmland that has been used to secure this opportunity.
So, and I mean, for good reason. And I think, if anyone's been following along of what's happening here in Ontario, we as a community, as an agriculture industry, are sort of getting mixed messages from the province, but also perhaps the feds, that on one hand, it's, hey, we need to protect farmland. And then on the other, it's, here's all this farmland that you can grow on so long as the price tag is big enough. So there's a lot of controversy about whether or not this should even be happening. There's also those who are saying, we need to be strategic in where we build housing or where we develop things. But we've got a few things at play. So the building this plant near St. Thomas is one of them. And I think it's a valid point as to, where it's going to be built and is that the best place for it? We, of course, are dealing with the housing crisis and where are we going to find space to build all these homes? And then we've got what I'm still trying to get some comments out of our Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs about Bill 97, which has language that could mean that farmland gets split into smaller lots to build housing. But I've been pushed off to municipalities. I've been pushed off to get any sort of comments. And so we've got this outward sort of, hey, we're, all about agriculture and our rural base and all that. And then we've got sort of this mismatch of well, actually also we have housing we need to build and we've got businesses we need to run. So sorry about your luck. It just doesn't seem to add up. So, I mean, to Senator Black's credit, he's bringing another angle to this, that it isn't just about, money. It's also about a finite resource, and that's farmland. And realistically, in this province, it is becoming an incredibly hot issue as to where we build what.
It was interesting there, Kelvin, that foreign company. Well, it is Volkswagen. They've been justifying it by it's going to be some pretty significant jobs in the St. Thomas, Ontario area. I don't feel like this will be the last time that we're having this kind of discussion, Kelvin, about how farmland is used and rezoned.
No, and it is a bit of a death by a thousand cuts kind of issue here, where each project, sure, that sounds good. The jobs that come from this, of course, auto sector is important from a political perspective in terms of votes associated with that. So, yeah, I do think, and it's, again, credit to Senator Black and credit to farm groups and individuals that are raising these concerns about the future value of farmland that is being taken for granted here because of the political focus right now on housing and on the auto sector and the EV evolution, adjusting to that whole the whole green economy of the future kind of thing. Those are the political priorities and talking points right now. So that's where the concerns about farmland become a lower priority from a political perspective. At least that's what it appears. And so, yeah, we need to, I think, continue to remind society and politicians about the value of farmland and food security and all those types of conversations that may not be as attractive in the real immediate short term, but in the long term are extremely important for the country.
Kelvin, what is Bill C-234? What's happening there?
Okay, Bill C-234, that's the legislation, the private members bill that would remove the carbon tax from natural gas and propane on farms, and it's moved on through the House of Commons. It was approved by MPs earlier this year, and it's now in the Senate. And this week, it actually moved ahead to second reading. It is being sponsored by Senator David Wells, not the former baseball pitcher for the Blue Jays and Yankees. He is sponsoring the bill, and so right now we're waiting to hear what the next steps are. It'll have to go to the Senate Ag Committee, I presume, and then after that, royal assent, assuming that Senate doesn't try to make any changes to it. Senator Wells was the co-chair of Pierre Poilievre's leadership campaign, so there's a Conservative Party link to the senator that is now the official sponsor of C-234 in the House of Commons. MP Lobb was the sponsor of it in the House of Commons.
So in the U.S., we make a big deal about which senators bring forward pieces of legislation like a lot. It really seems to matter more than we talk about it here in Canada. Is there any significance to Senator Wells being the sponsor?
Potentially. There was some effort. I can say that some stakeholders wanted actually Senator Black, who we just heard from in our previous conversation, to be the sponsor of this bill. It has to do with bipartisan support and gaining bipartisan support in the Senate for this legislation. So Senator Wells is certainly, having been the co-chair of Poilievre's leadership campaign, he's certainly a partisan, seen as a partisan senator. And so that's where it could potentially slow things down if anybody wants to play politics with this rather than having a bipartisan effort. Interesting.
Lyndsey, what is the update on what is going on with Yantai Gan? This is a research scientist that has been in some trouble, now is been sentenced on tax evasion. What's happened here?
Right. So to back up a little bit, so Dr. Yantai Gan worked for Agriculture and Agri-Food for 5 years. I want to say Kelvin might want to update this as well, but yeah, I think from 2012 to 2017.
That's right.
Yeah, and now he was facing other charges that recently were dropped because apparently RCMP can't work from home. So there are time limits on certain charges, and those charges were actually dropped. This, however, is on a CRA. So this is on a tax evasion charge. He did actually plead guilty, and essentially Gan was actually paid over $300,000 between two different interactions. So one was from a university in China, and one was through a pasta company in the US. So he was not supposed to, I suppose, be working for these, but more than that, he was supposed to report the income. He did not. And so he was fined $86,000 roughly as part of the sentencing. He also apparently failed to report rental income from a property he owned in BC as well. So Kelvin and I were talking about this earlier this week, that we're sort of surprised that something like this would be made public using names and numbers and all those sorts of things. And so I'm not sure, if it's, I suppose it's okay because he pled guilty. Therefore, there isn't any speculation as to whether or not he did it. But I do wonder if we would hear about this so much if it weren't for the fact that, he also was facing national security charges that had been dropped. So I sort of feel like, I don't know that we would have heard about this if there wasn't this other charge against him. Either way, he did plead guilty, and I suppose we wait and see if anything ever comes of the security issues.
We don't hear this. This is a very unique story.
It is quite, I will say. So he did work out of Swift Current. I know certainly that, in having worked in this industry, was aware of his work. He worked on crop rotation work and, was quite well known. And it is a bit surprising, I won't lie, and a bit strange, and seems to get stranger as time goes on.
Kelvin, you interviewed him at one time, right?
Yes, years ago. Many years ago in a different role, I did talk to him. Again, it was about his work diversifying crop rotations. He did a fair bit of research on alternative crops that could be grown in Western Canada. And so, and I guess as the court proceedings have now shown, he was also getting paid at the same time by this university in China. And that's where there were some national security, the RCMP, actually that original arrest and investigation was done by the National Security Enforcement section of the RCMP. So there was some real serious concern. And the narrative where it isn't completely unique over the last 5-10 years, where we have seen connections back to China in terms of research and stuff happening at universities here in North America and other parts of the world, it looks like that part of the narrative has now kind of fallen by the wayside, or at least there hasn't been enough evidence to hold those charges around fraud and some of the other things that breach of trust was another major one that he was charged with initially. Those are the charges that have since been stayed. But it's a unique situation, and I expect over time we might find out more details here. But it's certainly an interesting story.
We've got more to talk about on the China front. We'll do that in the next segment, but I did want to hit on quickly, Kelvin. It sure does not seem, at least at this point, that we're going to have an extension of this Ukraine-Russia Black Sea grain deal. We heard Ukraine, I think it was the ag minister, say this week that, if it didn't happen, they have alternative strategies and it wouldn't be an apocalyptic event if there's no extension. That sort of seems for me to be a bit of a tell. And Ranulph Glanville from Grain Fox, he agreed with that when he was on the show on Wednesday. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it does seem to kind of be the pendulum seems to be leaning towards that side of what the outcome could be here. But yeah, it is changing. And one of the key countries that's a stakeholder in this or kind of the facilitator of it is the country of Turkey. And Turkey has an election happening this weekend where they could see a change in government for the first time in 21 years. And so Erdogan has been the leader there for over 2 decades. They're facing extreme inflation. Of course, they had the earthquake recovery that's happening just a few months ago, and all the other different. There's a lot of upheaval right now in Turkey, and it sounds. There were reports yesterday, I believe, that maybe the third place or one of the minor leadership candidates dropped out, leading, and his support would probably go to the opponent, the leader of the opposition. So it sounds like, that election could be something to watch. And of course, then along with that, how does that impact the grain deal in terms of Turkey facilitating that and playing a role in that? I'm not sure where the parties stand in terms of wanting to advance it. I think it'd be to Turkey's benefit to continue with that corridor deal. But like you said, Shaun, the odds right now looking a little bit like it could be at risk.
And how does Turkey approach imports of ag commodities too under a new government? And obviously that has impacts in Canada as well.
It's such a major hub. I didn't realize Turkey is also the second largest military in NATO. So like they're
really
a power in many different fronts. Yeah.
Didn't know that either. There you go. Hey, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to see what the panel's reaction and thoughts are on what China does next as Canada has shipped a diplomat back to China. You're listening to RealAg Radio here for the RealAg Issues Panel. It's now time for a product spotlight, all about the Pest and Predator podcast, brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grain Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm. Joining me right now is Dr. John Givlosky. He's an entomologist with Manitoba Agriculture. Okay, we got another season of the Pest and Predator podcast. John, what is the Pest and Predator podcast, and what can listeners expect in what I can't believe is going to be season 4?
Yeah, it's a series of interviews with entomologists from across the prairies, and we're talking about pests and predators that are common in Western Canada. And what we'll be doing is we'll be bringing you the latest information on pests that you may encounter in your fields and the beneficials that help to control them. And with each episode, we feature a different entomologist on a different topic. Listeners will also learn about the role that beneficial insects can play in their fields and ways that we can protect them and some scouting tips.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, last segment of the week. Time flies when you're having fun. And I want to tell you about Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name. Go to borax.com. Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, myself, Shaun Haney, and this week, I guess maybe we're just doomsdayers in Canada, but it seems since Canada has sent the Chinese diplomat excommunicated and said persona non grata, go back home. Canada's been waiting for, and mainstream really grabbed on this, that we're expecting the next shoe to drop, and all of a sudden we're going to see a lot of bans on agricultural commodities, as a good example, going to China or not going to China. Up until this point, Lyndsey, it's been a little bit quiet. What are your thoughts on this?
Right. So we said, hey, diplomat, get out. China turned around and said, fine, your diplomat also has to leave. So a bit of a, tit for tat, whatevs. But, and for good reason, we are sort of anxiously awaiting, does this sort of escalate to a certain something found in a load of canola, because we've seen that before, whether it's a weed seed. Do we find, certain protein from a certain plant, has a certain residue. I mean, this is how China likes to do business. As far as when they're not happy, they make it known in not so subtle ways. So we are, I think, waiting. Whether or not it actually happens, I think, you had Ranulph on the show earlier this week. I think he had some really great advice of like, yes, it's an unknown. Yes, it could happen, but there's lots of other stuff that is happening that we can sort of take as, you can make decisions based on. Speculating on what could happen, honestly, there's nothing I think we can do about it anyway. So I think we just need to keep focused on what's really happening out there and keep tabs. But ultimately, if China decides they don't want to fill in commodity whatevs from us, then they're not buying it, and there's not much we can do about it. Does it escalate further from there? Well, then I don't know. What else does Canada do? We typically don't have the leverage in these situations.
Did you laugh when I was comparing China to like Darth Vader and the Death Star in that Randolph interview?
I shook my head, so that's like laughing, I think. Yeah. Anyway, it was
you shook your head with a smirk, or shook your head with the what the heck is he doing?
No, I like it. I like when you go off on your tangents of like, how can we make this a parallel? Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, Randolph, he wasn't sure how to react to that. I think
most of our guests sometimes.
He's like, what show am I on here? What is that?
Yeah, what is happening right now? Yeah, one of those.
I think the reality here is you talk to different commodity analysts, including Randolph. We hear Kelvin a lot of this just comes down to, does China need the product or not? And if they don't need the product because they have another supplier somewhere else, those are likely the targets if they decide to go that way.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, this is all on the heels of the two Michaels, and I'd say Canada's scars right now are pretty fresh, and those wounds are still fresh. So we're extra sensitive. I do wonder also about the timing of when this happened from when it was raised as an issue, and the fact that there's even reporting today that CSIS had a book on this diplomat and the kind of the stuff he was doing here in Canada, not maybe overtly spying, but stuff along those lines, intelligence type stuff. That book goes back over 3 years. And so I think the timing of this makes me wonder whether there wasn't some even conversation between the Chinese and Canadian governments, maybe a backroom kind of conversation that happened that might kind of stem the back and forth on this specific incident.
Yeah. Okay. The persona non grata, it was actually in the government release. That was actually really interesting, Lyndsey. Did that stick out for you?
Well, it does, and I feel like we're just adding to the list of very unused terms that this government likes to use. So,
my dad uses that one all the time.
Oh, so but I always I thought it was just a really fancy way of being like, get out. But we also, with the inquiry, what do they call it? The raconteur or the, are we just digging for some very odd terms? And we're just trying to, I feel like we're in like some sort of liberal government bingo. Like we're trying to use as many obscure terms as possible. So whoever had this,
I think persona
is a technical term though, is it not?
It means unwelcome person in Latin.
Yeah, no, I know what it means, but I mean like legally they have to use that term.
Oh, and it's based on the Vienna Convention, I believe, right? There's an international agreement, and as part of that agreement, countries they do not need a reason to kick a diplomat out. It's just that it causes backlash when it happens. So that's where Canada actually, compared to other countries, has been pretty weak at expelling diplomats or soft on expelling diplomats. We haven't expelled any Russian diplomats, for example, as a result of the invasion last year and the war happening in Ukraine. We did a few years earlier.
In perspective.
Was at a time when other countries were doing it too. So, yeah, it is significant, but I think there was just so much political pressure to make this happen. They had to do it. And it's an example. There's more and more cases, more and more examples of the federal government finding itself cornered like this and having to do something because of political pressure and just Canadians putting pressure on them that this is the right thing to do kind of thing.
Yeah, you got to really be up to some bad stuff if you're making Canada mad.
Mm-hmm. We're quite tolerant, and probably to a fault.
find excuses. Like, well, did he really mean it? Like, is that what his intent was? You know, I'm sure he's very good natured.
Well, maybe not. But like to that point, we are, you know, yes, we're very important. When I say, you know, the royal we have a lot of exports. We have things that countries want, but on the grand scheme of things, we're not a huge country, right? So we do need to be diplomatic and keep our friends close and, you know, those sorts of things, right? So I understand perhaps on a global scale where it comes from, of perhaps being a little too nice, and it is a very on-brand thing to do. But, you know, I think that this is the point of the government had to do something significant because they were just facing far too much pressure to do nothing.
And we heard from the farmers yesterday. Like, I think this is one of those areas where the rural Canadian conservative, many of you listening, you're conflicted, right? Because polls would show that conservatives in Canada want Canada to be a little bit more hawkish on China, that we have, you know, bent over too much for them. But we know, and so there was a lot of support from the farmers on the rapid fire yesterday about this. But, you know, I can't remember who had noted that, but if I just wear my farmer hat, I'm like, oh, man, did we have to do this? But I know as a Canadian, this was the right decision. So there's definitely, it's not gray area, but there's definitely here for a lot of farmers, there's some conflict. Is that a fair way to put it, Kelvin?
For sure. And this is something that we've dealt with over the past decade longer when it comes to dealing with China and some of these types of issues. We certainly enjoy the demand and as we've seen agricultural exports from North America increase over the last couple of decades, this is something that we have to grapple with.
Absolutely. Okay. So, hey, Lyndsey, what are you looking forward to and watching out for next week? Is it planting progress? Is that top of mind for you, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I am, well, as I mentioned, we're in the throes of lambing. So I am keeping a careful eye on the weather, just like everybody else, because, of course, we would love to have a nice, dry, sunny window to get this crop of the ground, get lambs on the ground, and get everybody off to a good start. So definitely, you know, we are here. We were the 12th today. You know, not late, but we need to make a lot of progress in a short amount of time. And so definitely going to keep an eye on that forecast, keep checking with everybody of how they're going, how they're rolling, how things are going in the ground, and what kind of messes we might have. You know, we definitely did see earlier this week some people probably pushing it on the fitness of the soil, a little too mucky. So patience is key, but we are at least a little tight on time. So that's what we'll be watching for sure.
Yeah. Kelvin, you're just all watching the Leafs, right?
A good friend, neighbor, made the astute observation yesterday. He asked whether we'd ever planted soybeans while the Leafs were still in the playoffs, and I can say in my farming career I have not. So there's a first time for everything,
and maybe a last time. You never know. So there you go.
This is going to become the normal. This is just a normal tradition.
Is this one of those things where if you're planting soybeans in Manitoba with the Leafs in the playoffs, you're too early?
Some people might argue, yeah. And in the last 20 years, that would certainly have been the case because you'd have been planting in April, maybe even March.
I see what's going on here. The second round sucks.
What?
There have been a lot of blowouts.
Yeah. Terrible.
The Toronto-Florida series has actually probably had the closest games.
Well, Vegas and Edmonton's horrific.
It's not great.
Yeah. First round is always the best.
But
by the third round, they get tired. It goes downhill kind of, I think, in the third round, doesn't it? I don't know. The first round is so good.
Yes, I would agree on that one.
It's hard to measure against, for sure.
I also find with farming season and getting busy in the field and baseball, beautiful weather outside, it just gets harder and harder to pay attention unless your team's in it.
Yeah, I hear you. Blue Jays, man. Blue Jays. Let's go, Jays. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we'll, of course, chat again on Monday. Cheers, everybody.